So I think what could be helpful, and George, I guess, is an honorary Buffalonian. What's the word? Buffalonian or something? Is that really a word? Oh, God. Okay. You learn something new every day. I think part of the conversation that would be helpful to have is to really talk about the existing, not just the initiatives, but the sort of economic theory that is driving the revival of Buffalo and the revival of Niagara Falls, right? And then, obviously the work of Launch New York. I mean, because to a large extent, opportunity zones is just another part of the stack, right? And they're going to be best positioned to add value in places that actually do have a consensus on reality and an economic narrative that is grounded in evidence and is not completely delusional, right? And then, so I think what's been so impressive to me the last day and a half is to see all this activity that's been underway that this new tool could essentially enhance, right? Most communities I go to obviously have not spent the last 7 years really honing a particular narrative, deploying capital in very strategic ways, and are not really, so they're spending most of their time doing what you've already done, and laying the groundwork to provide the platform. So I think it would be helpful to maybe talk about your own thinking, and then George could give really maybe a perspective on other places really that might have done this as well, and how you think about opportunity zones being the sort of next stage of economic revitalization, or the next sort of booster rocket, really. And then, I think we can all be frank about either the law's deficiencies or the lack of a, cohesive response, either within this community or at the state level or wherever. I mean, this has been one of these federal tools where we've had a year and a half of unbelievable hype, and now we're finally at the point of, okay, is this going to happen? But all the talk about $6 trillion in unrealized gains, and we're going to mobilize it. Okay, well now things are actually happening, but it's going to happen more likely in places that have set the ground. So I don't know if anyone wants to start, but I think the biggest vehicle for success when you have these kind of time constraints that are built into the law are places that have already started, right? I mean, it's not like a secret here. Places that already have a narrative, they've already made investments, they've already created a market, and then this is like the next obvious evolution. So I think for both Buffalo and Niagara Falls, the question would be, where do you feel you've made the strongest advances through planning, deployment, et cetera, off of which opportunity zones could be the next boost. Is that clear enough? I think that conversation to me, as opposed, this then leads down to real transactions, real deals, real investors. But to a large extent, we're still at a point of Buffalo and Niagara Falls declaring with some clarity, here is our economic case, off of which you can attract some broader set of investments. Who wants to start?
Thanks very much. First of all, I'd just like to say, how gratifying it is to have the opportunity to sit on a panel with Bruce Katz to talk about opportunity zones, because I've certainly sat in the audience for enough of these events. This is kind of a challenge for me because, the way that I present myself as an expert on opportunity zones is just listening to what Bruce says, taking careful notes, and regurgitating them to audiences that haven't had the opportunity to hear him yet. But the fact that he's taking an interest in what's happening here in Western New York at a time when he is the recognized leading, expert on opportunity zones in the United States, which is what you are, Bruce, quite clearly, right? I think it bodes very well for us here. So at the beginning of this story, I think you could go back as far in our history as you want to. There have been a number of lost opportunities in the history of Western New York. You wonder what would have happened if we'd had Launch New York and 43 North when Tesla was still in the region, right? Maybe there's no fossil fuel age and we live in a totally different world. I don't know. But it seems to me that we're sort of at one of those turning points again, but it's taken us a while to get there, right? In the 1990s in Niagara Falls, our old industrial economy, which had been collapsing, for some time, had really fallen, flat on its face. And there were a series of exercises where we tried to reimagine post-industrial economy for Western New York. Some of which, like Rethinking Niagara, and the Niagara and Rethinking Niagara is the Niagara frontier, so it encompassed the whole region, right? Was something that was done with Canadian partners in the room, academia, business, government at all levels, and so on. And it was just, how are we going to make a living in the world going forward, right? There were a number of interesting ideas that came out of that. There have been, a number of other exercises. I think there have been seminal exercises as well. I go back to things like the Cultural Tourism Initiative that sort of was a rethinking of cultural assets here in Buffalo and elsewhere in Western New York. And we had an opportunity here in Western New York because of the way that we've been making a living in the world wasn't going to work anymore. We clearly had to reimagine ourselves, and we had no money to actually do anything but sit around and talk, right? But we used to tell people back in those days that, we may be poor, but we're not stupid, right? And so I think there began there something that later on then becomes the spirit of the whole Regional Economic Development Council exercise that Governor Cuomo put in place. And that is this idea that the best plans for community revitalization and economic development come not from the top down, but from the bottom up, right? And so for all of those years that we couldn't do something like, for example, remove the Robert Moses Parkway because there was no political consensus, and even if there had been, there was no money, we could sit around and talk about what that would mean to our community and how, if we could achieve that, it would open doors to a lot of other very positive developments. And so we did a huge amount of planning work, and this involved dozens, maybe frightening to think of it even now looking back, just my 12 years as mayor, hundreds of community meetings were gathering input. And the miracle in all of this is that a consensus emerged about the major elements of what a new strategy would be, both in terms of some of the infrastructure elements, in our case, the expansion of the park, changes to the transportation system, on the economic development side, diversification of the economy, treating tourism like a real industry instead of like, tulips that pop up in the spring or something, right? Trying to do things like workforce development and job training infrastructure and so on for tourism. So we did a lot of really good thinking. We came up with some really good ideas, and then lo and behold, as a region, we stuck with the paradigm long enough to find the money to do the implementation. And I think, Bruce, that one of the things that maybe got the governor's attention with the Buffalo Billion was that there was evidence here that a lot of thinking had been done, that we had worked out amongst ourselves what our priorities would be. And that we held to this consensus for years and years and years until the monies could catch up with us. So an idea like reconnecting to the waterfront. Congressman Higgins, back before he was congressman, at least, his days with it was, I think, Friends of the Buffalo River only, right? Gone through many name changes, that organization. But these turned out to be seminal, but in the end, revolutionary ideas. But it took the public coming to public meetings and saying more or less the same thing over a period of 5, 10, now we're going on 20 years to make all of the public realm investments that we needed to lay the groundwork for what comes next. So to me, this sense of strategy and intentionality maintained over a long period of time helps to draw resources first maybe from government in the form of public investments, and I just came from a great announcement with the governor this morning on the downtown revitalization initiative in Niagara Falls. But there are going to be many of those investments, I think, forthcoming from this administration in Albany. But I think it's also the case that through the vehicle of opportunity zones, there's now, and I keep running into this problem of wanting to use the word opportunity in the same sentence as opportunity zone, so I've got to get it with thesaurus or something. But it's an opportunity now for the private sector to become involved in this process in a very timely manner, because the situation, I think, is very ripe here. You have a combination of social need on the one hand, a lot of good that can be done for people who've struggled for a long time, but also, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a great believer in markets. Also, I think great market opportunities. When there's a confluence of those two things, I think that means that your moment has arrived with at least some segment of the investment community that cares about the social results of how they invest their money.
Can I ask a question, and then I think as we go down the line, we should repeat this question. It was raised this morning about the role of our Canadian friends, either as investors, companies, you name it, right? Could you just talk a little about that, and then go to Brent?
Yeah, it's my way of thinking, we're blessed to be in a state that's got the greatest city in the world, New York City, right? I'm not one of those people that wants to, cut the bridges and have Manhattan drift off into the sea. I don't see any of those people in the room. There are some people like that in our region, right? But I think it's also the case that, if you haven't recently, traveled up to Toronto, it's only an hour and a half away, or 4 hours if you get stuck in traffic on the Queen Mary. But go up and take a look and see what's happening, right? So at the same time as we're in the shadow of New York City in some ways, and we play off of that in terms of economic development, we're clearly in the shadow of Toronto, and it's geographically much closer. So that means there's always the challenge of how to deal with the border. And from our perspective, the freest possible factor of mobility, so people, money, products, ideas, right, across the border, the better off we're going to be in the future. So we're advocates for that. But we certainly in Niagara Falls have been tremendous beneficiaries of direct investment by Canadians, even as the Canadian dollar has been weak relative to the US dollar. So that's an interesting development. Some of it is hedging. So you have people in the tourism industry who want to have some assets on each side of the borders, so that if one side of Niagara Falls performs better than the other, they've got some dollars at least on the winning horse. I think that the cost of real estate in Southern Ontario now has escalated to the point where even initiating a project becomes intimidating, and so I think it's attractive. And I know the real estate market is burgeoning in Niagara Falls, New York, but still hasn't caught up to Buffalo, so there's some attractive opportunities there. And then I think we also now see firms that are interested to operate with sort of 1 foot on each side of the international border, that see the border in some ways as an obstacle, but in other ways as an opportunity. If you're a U.S. company in the pharmaceutical industry, right, that's thinking, working with some Canadian firms could be the future for the next 20 years, in our industry. I want to be in the U.S., but I want to be able to access Canada on a regular basis. We've got a Nexus bridge in Niagara Falls. You don't even have to wait in line, right? So I think trying to take advantage of the proximity of Canada is, for all of Western New York, it's challenging in many ways, but I think it's a really unique asset for our region that can benefit us in many ways. And it's, Dan Kowalski from Commerce Department, it's one of the conversations I've had with him, is how can we structure opportunity zone deals so that Canadian investors can benefit in some ways. I mean, you have to have U.S. income in order to be able to take tax advantage, but there might be compensation other places in the deal, right? If you've got U.S. and Canadian firms partnering, the U.S. firm is able to take the tax advantage and give something else to the Canadian investor. I think that's something we in this region really need to work on as a research issue with opportunity zones.
So, one thing that just strikes me is I don't know how many, when we talk about typologies of opportunity zones, how many tourism zones there are in the United States, but it is its own special kind of economy. I don't want to, just see the economy in a monochromatic way, but that's a really interesting notion of given your base, what could you be in 5 to 10 years, and backcast and say what are the kind of investments to get us there. That's where we're going forward here with some more granular prospectus-like diagnostics and market-making tools. I don't think anyone in the country has laid out what a tourism zone could be, and it's its own very special part of the economy. So, Brendan, Buffalo, and I really am struck, just starting with what the mayor said. God, there's been more planning in this place, in a very positive way, and particularly with regard to the special spatial fabric and building inventory, historic stock you have. So as you look across your 17 zones, you also have had a lot of deliberative, purposeful moves here for a pretty broad period of time that has now yielded some serious results. So this is like the way to fully realize the potential. How do you prioritize that? Because you've had so much going on. Is it the commercial corridors? Is it the industrial space? Which areas can pop first, and where do you need help, frankly, from the broader community to help realize this?
Well, with Mayor Brown, I think it's always started with a conversation with the community in terms of those priorities. And we've constantly evolved in the work that we're doing, starting with one of the first initiatives when I first came in, which was the Green Code, and just looking at what the barriers were to investment. It doesn't matter whether it's opportunity zone investment or any other type of vehicle or fund whatsoever, what makes it easier for investors to achieve the community's vision. And that's what we worked through in terms of creating this completely new development framework out there. And then realizing really at this point in time that now we work through the challenge of the financial structure of these deals. And I think that's one of the things that probably isn't seen or recognized as much is the finance side. And it's sitting in this building in particular, exemplary of some of the most sophisticated public financing that made this building a reality. The number of different sources that were needed to make this a reality was extensive. And that's just the brick and mortar. That doesn't include the programmatic side with the consortium that was created to undertake the programs that are happening here. But it started with a vision that the mayor had, collaborating with the governor and his staff about what this particular corridor could be. And what this opportunity could be. He's the mayor. He's obviously people have viewed him as the mayor now in his fourth term, but he was originally the council member from Aston, and so he has had a very strong focus on this neighborhood for a while. But it's that financial aspect, and that's where I thought it was great. Laura Cabral's presentation was really good this morning, bringing in things like the local waterfront revitalization program, which is a planning initiative that comes with financial incentives with it, both grant and also tax incentives. And that's true for the Brownfield Opportunity Area as well. So these were programs and initiatives that we went and engaged in with purpose and did those in a manner that was consistent with the work that we had already done. Then, as part of the Buffalo Billion, from the very beginning, we thought commercial corridors were essential. That is really, these commercial corridors are our shared space. This is where everybody in the community, at some point in time in their day, typically is going to go down that corridor. And it's a definition of how they feel about their community and what's happening in their community. And it's important to strengthen those commercial corridors. Not easy to do necessarily in this day and age with the challenges in retail and which has been going on for quite some time and accelerated recently in terms of the online impact. But nonetheless, a very important shared space, which is why, as part of the governor's commitment of the billion, the Better Buffalo Fund was created, which focused on these corridors. And then, as the governor came along with phase 2 of the Buffalo Billion, as Laura put it this morning, as opposed to Buffalo Billion 2, because it wasn't a full billion. So phase 2 of the Buffalo Billion, to double down on the east side corridors in particular, the 4 east side corridors that we have, and to work on making that a little bit, to make it more comprehensive as well in its approach, and bringing more money to where more money was needed, because there had been more disinvestment in these neighborhoods. So we needed something to work to balance that. But the financing aspect, again, is something that is not necessarily seen in a building like this. But then I think Buffalo is very fortunate just in terms of the talent and skill that is required to put these types of deals together. I think Marty demonstrated that really well this morning when she gave her a quick little 5-minute summary of the work that she's doing, that these words that we put out there have meaning, and you can put that 5-minute summary together, but it takes a long time at the end of the day, a lot of times, to put these deals together, and a lot of trial and error. And you try to win as much as possible, and every once in a while you're not going to win, but even those failures are very important in terms of what you can learn from that. And so the opportunity zone aspect now is just the latest, and it's how to layer that in is going to be interesting, because I was just talking with one developer before I came in here. Each one of these funds is going to be different. So they're all going to have their different rules. They all have their different expectations from their investors. So it's not going to be this monolith of money that's coming into the area. And it's not only the terms and conditions of that money, but it's also the mission of the money at the end of the day. Some people will be okay with maybe a 2 to 3% return. Others are going to expect a hefty return with that money, and then the exit vehicle as well at the end of the 10 years for that. So that makes it difficult for us to necessarily predict. And the partnership and collaboration, one of the things that Laura talked about this morning, is the special sauce of what we're doing. All that more important in terms of the communication amongst all the partners, to see where we can play or not. And also the blessing right now that we have is in terms of philanthropy, as we've talked about, and the role that they can play in meeting what might be a short-term return expectation versus a longer-term play in terms of the investment for the overall return can be made on the product. So we, at its core, Mayor Brown has sought to just create an environment that's conducive to investment. So people talk about things like the permit program, create a special permit program for OZ. We already have one of the fastest permit programs in the state. So whether it's OZ or something else, we just want it to be fast, regardless. Fast and good for what we do. So there's going to be this conversation, I think, is going to evolve in a very interesting way. The OZs that we have in the city of Buffalo were placed in areas that we thought that they were right for that investment, or the potential of that investment anyway. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yes, just to knit the two of these, then I'm going to have Marty and then George go. And George may disagree with this, but I find the focus on...
Disagree with you?
No, but I find this focus on commercial corridors highly unusual. In fact, the Niagara Falls story is a part of how very granular, Jane Jacobs-like small business with a heavy mix of quality placemaking, because of the historic legacy of these communities and the stock. I mean, as we drove up and down a lot of these corridors, I was really struck by how much remains. In a lot of parts of the U.S., it's been blown apart, or it's been suburbanized. I mean, that's really, I think, the story of a lot of U.S. urban communities. We brought in strip malls into a lot of these commercial corridors, so it doesn't really look like a city. Your corridor looks like a city. And so I think it strikes me that there's a very distinctive play that's been going on here with a lot of public capital. We probably have focused more on the public side of the investment than on the leveraging of commercial debt or on private equity, whatever that looked like pre-OZ. But there's a level of analysis here, both to reflect on what these markets could look like in a world of big box, in a world of online. So it's not going to look like what it did 50 years ago. There's no way, no how. But there's a bit of like really realpolitik or real market imagining, coupled with new financial structures, coupled with the marketing that the prospectus has, that could be highly different. And there are other players now in the space, like Streetlight Ventures, which you mentioned, you know, the folks out of Philly with Shift Capital in North Kensington, Ross Baird, who I work a lot with, at a Blueprint Local Village Capital. It's like this emerging crowd of commercial corridors or street corners that I don't think realize how much has been going on in Buffalo. I mean, it's a big country, right? So if we were in Holland, we'd all know what was going on, but we're not.
Right.
We're the United States. So my gut sense is there's something that now needs to be cohered, because there's been a certain kind of investment in these corridors and a very large amount of planning. But now you have a completely new tool with a different class of investors that don't have a clue what the hell's been going on here. I mean, really, you know? So this is the 60-day work that probably should happen. And if you want to only count work days of the week, or we can extend out a couple months or whatever, you know. If you want to cheat, you can cheat. But I mean, do you feel like, from a national perspective, either you have peers or that there's an understanding of what has been a very distinctive intervention, really, by the city?
I don't know that there's an understanding necessarily. I think we were very intentional about our approach, and we saw the value, and this speaks to cultural tourism, as the mayor mentioned, and a lot of things in our uniqueness, in our unique history, and the quality of place that we have, even though at times it has certainly gone through challenging phases. We saw that was a phase, I think, for the most part, and that it didn't matter who we talked to. People talked about connection, which you get in the urban area. People talked about quality of place. People talked about small business, walkability, accessibility, just overall quality of life. And form and function is very important to that, which is why we, again, we're very intentional with our Green Code process, the Unified Development Ordinance, to take that into account. And it was much less about, and I have to put transportation in there as well, what that building was per se on that one lot. But when you opened the door to go somewhere, what was your experience? Mm-hmm. Where were you going? Who were you seeing? What transportation mode were you traveling on? What was the quality of that experience? And that still is the question, and what we're focused on in terms of the finance now at this point in time, which to some degree might make it, and I think does make it more difficult, because it's, I think to the word you used earlier, granular. It's not about one big deal. It's about dozens of small deals, and we've been very focused on singles as opposed to the home runs. And I think a lot of our singles that we've hit have led to the home runs that we have in the city of Buffalo at this point in time. So I'm sure I've seen smatterings of it, and to the extent that I'm allowed to leave the office of the city, that I've seen smatterings of it around the country, but it's really been driven by a voice here internally that I think that we've listened to in terms of the development.
I just wanted to add one thought in. So as we talk about, Bruce, you've been hitting on this thought of, have you guys established sort of a national theme or presence to who Buffalo is and how it's recovered? And obviously from Lori's presentation, it's just going through this amazing recovery, and all this planning has happened. just reminds me of, I have an investment group in DC, and it's a bunch of guys that invest in real estate, private equity real estate. And we typically have a few developers that we have invested with and we like them, and when they go to a new city, they come back and tell us why we should be interested in that city. And the story is usually pretty succinct. It's like, you should go to Detroit because a bunch of stuff happened in Detroit. There's a really rich guy who's bought half the city, and you can mortgage for him, or you can join in and buy real estate yourself. Or you should go to Orlando because Disney is doing really well and they're expanding, and there's a lot of demand for housing down there with their expansion. Or adding it to other cities in Philadelphia or DC, right? Amazon HQ2 just came to DC. You should think about Northern Virginia. So I think when I hear you talk about a story or a narrative or a short narrative that explains the turnaround and the opportunity succinctly, one of the things that occurs to me is, what is that for Buffalo? One of the things I think about is a city that went through a tough time that's recovering and has a ton of building stock that's in really good shape. And so if you think about sort of the growth that can come to this city, there's reasons to believe it could be a lot easier for this city to grow than a city that never was big in the first place, right? Because you have all these corridors and this building stock. And so as people move back in, whether it's from Toronto or from other places in the U.S., as I said before, I was sitting at a table with 3 Southern California people who now live in Buffalo. It's going to be very easy to sort of expand the workable areas in Buffalo, given that they're already built, they're there, they just need to be rehabbed. But there's some sort of story like that not only do you have to create, but then you have to find someone to go around the country and sing it from the rooftops, right? We were in a conference in California, and actually a series of cities had their chance to stand up to the microphone and talk about how great their cities were and why investors should come to their city. And there were a few guys that were, I can't tell if they were selling their city or promoting a fight. They were really good at sort of like lining up why their city was the best place to go. And so I think, that kind of promotion, once you get your story straight, is really important on the national stage. The last thing I'll say is, people talk about attracting investors, attract investors, and that's true, but in this sort of more arcane world of real estate investing, investors follow their developer friends. And so I would also say, think about attracting developers who are regional or mid-sized or quasi-national developers with all kinds of incentives and promotional materials, etc., free 2-day stays in Buffalo. But think about attracting the developers, because the developers will bring their networks of investors with them. They'll come here, they'll find some sites, and then they'll go and talk to people like Mike in DC and say, hey, listen, you guys are sleeping on Buffalo, you should invest in Buffalo. So just thinking through connecting the dots on investors.
I just want to reinforce what George just said. I was in a room with about 25 investors last week with a developer / financier, and the investors were from all over the country. And I went up to each one of them, like, why are you in this deal? Why are you in this fund? Oh, because we know him. And we believe. We believe what he's doing. And I said, well, would you do it in your own town? And no, I don't know anyone in my own town. It was a classic kind of story. But it's very true. One last thing about Jane Jacobs, I'll talk in the morning. So if you reread The Death and Life of Great American Cities, chapter 16, it's not like I haven't read this a couple times. This is pure geekdom, right? Chapter 16 talks about the difference between cataclysmic money and gradual money. Cataclysmic money is the money that came in with urban renewal, with freeway expansion. It destroyed it, devastated communities, right? Gradual money is the money that comes in for small business and mixed use and streetscape and creates the quality of places and corridors, which is why we love certain communities and barely tolerate others. And I think this is a city of gradual money in some respects. And I think that's a piece of the narrative, because it might speak to crowdfunding, it might speak to impact investing. It's a different kind of mindset, really, that could appeal. And you don't need to appeal to many, frankly, to do the kind of financing we're talking about. Marnie. So I think what's interesting here is this interplay of density, co-location, concentration, and business, in a way. So it's not like let's fund any business anywhere in a way. It's like how do we get that 2 + 2 = 5 effect off of these hubs and these corridors? So how does Launch New York think about that, both in terms of your incubators and in terms of the financing side? And then let's talk through the land of Oz, opportunity zones.
So I would say we don't think of ourselves as attached to sort of one location, and in fact we're purposely set up as a virtual or distributed venture development organization, but we're very fortunate that the opportunity zones happen to contain what are some of our most notable incubator facilities. So if we take a look at, back to your comment, Mayor Deister, about how do we reimagine our community. So think of ACV Auctions as the new online wholesale car auction business. Our chair is the CEO of that company. That company is hiring dozens of employees a month now. It's only 5 years old. That's the future. So Launch New York tends to think of itself as transforming our economy through high growth potential entrepreneurship, because we know the history of these young companies with high growth potential creating all net new job growth in this country for the last 30 years. So think about the developers who are now swarming around ACV Auctions, trying to attempt to deal with the fact that they need space for hundreds of people that were jobs no one ever could have imagined a few short years ago. So we tend to think about that in everything we do. We are fortunate that we're in the right communities that need to be transformed, but I would also say we want to make sure that as an ACV Auctions or any of our other hundreds of clients grow, that there are on-ramps for every person in this community to join these companies. While the tech phrase or high growth may scare many away, the reality is you need administrative support in these companies. You need people doing bookkeeping. You need people doing marketing, people doing social media. There are jobs out there for everyone. So what we see is that this community is actually struggling, as many are. How do we feed these awesome beasts that are being spawned and need talent? And it may not even be the skill set that's the issue for us, but it's the embracing of the entrepreneurial culture. So I keep having individuals approach me and say, should I take a job with a startup company, or should I take a job with fill in the blank of known company name? So I think that we have seen communities who start talking about, can OZs fund workforce development? That's really getting creative. So I've heard a couple creative models. I'm not sure we're ready to be there. So for us, we tend to think of ourselves as matrixed across everything happening here. I love the idea that take a place like Northland, there's a lot of property here. We were just talking earlier, is there an opportunity where a new building might be erected here that could be sold back in the state to private folks under an OZ deal, and then we had co-locate companies there who are being funded through Launch New York types of vehicles. That's the kind of comprehensive plan that I think we need to have available. So I do feel a sense of urgency around this program, but I will say that at the end of the day, what's stymieing so many people about OZs is that you're talking to a whole new kind of investor. Many of the developers here, and Alex and I have spent a lot of time doing customer discovery, they'll say things like, we know exactly who will invest in our project, we just want to see how to take advantage of the incentive. And we had a couple who said, you know what, some of my usual investors may be out of the equation, and I may need new people in on projects. So we have some people who are thinking, and that thinking big is needed, but then it has to be paired with a market who's ready. And I think we should all view opportunity zones as the time to create our network of investors who will forever want to support this community, who will forever want to hear about the deals and projects, not just for the next 2 years while you still get another 10% discount, as I like to call it, on your capital gains tax. So for us, we view this as creating a ready group of people who are not already talking to us. And so now you have to have the people coming up with the projects, and you have to have somebody going and getting these investors, and there needs to be a trusted conduit to bring those two together. So I really feel like everybody in this room, you know who some of those individuals are. We're doing Buffalo Homecoming this fall. That is helping us reach out. But let's hope that this is just the start of what will always make it easy for people to give back to this community.
I'm hearing, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, because I have a friend of mine in California who basically calls American finance driven by the merchants of complexity. So, you know, in a lot of ways, what we're doing is demystifying finance, right? I mean, I thought your presentation was phenomenal, right? Because you're talking about a series of real deals and then showing the stack and showing the expectations. And I'm wondering whether there needs to be, and this would be the first in the US, like some kind of programming which would occur within the city and Niagara Falls, the metro, which could take real deals as they occur, or the financing charrette idea. It gets back to the, you know, the commercial corridor question of small business, and begin to break down, you know, what kind of capital is needed for what class of entrepreneur, and where the hell is this going to come from, right? Because some of this is going to be traditional debt, and some of it's going to be this new class, and some of it's public incentive. And maybe Buffalo is the place that really invents that, you know, it's not simple, but it ain't that complicated, really, at the end of the day, right? And I think what goes on, and I'm not saying it's going on here, but it goes on in a lot of rooms I'm in, the language is not even like understood universally. When we talk about internal rate of return, I mean, everyone just sort of nods, but maybe what we've got to do is, I mean, this is like really going back to basics. Taking different kinds of projects, different classes of entrepreneurs, either focusing on real deals or on potential deals, and beginning to break it down and beginning to find that a different kind of capital sourcing. I don't think we lack capital in most of the major, and I would, you know, this is a major metropolis, right? So capital is not the problem. Organizing the capital and demystifying the capital, I think, is the issue. So maybe that's something that, you know, there's not many launch New Yorks around the country, right?
There are a few. So we are modeled after some other groups, but they were heavily state funded. So we realized we needed to go to the private sector. So think of this problem. Let's just simplify it. It goes like this. You all are here because you care about this community. If you went to a financial manager and said, I want to invest in Western New York, you would get a blank stare. What do you mean? Those aren't the kind of mutual funds I handle. So the problem we're trying to solve is as simple in statement as that. So for us, we're saying, let us make the back end of this simple for you. You don't need to worry about how these opportunity zones work. We're going to make sure it's transparent so you know what you're getting into, but let us take care of the lift for you. If it's a real estate deal, if it's a company, let us figure out how to present those to you, and let us not just do it for today and for opportunity zones, but let's do this forever. You can be anywhere in the world, and you can bring your resources back to Western New York without having to do anything but press some computer keys. That's what I'm all about.
I think you're talking about a different intermediary structure, because the wealth management firms, the private equity firms, there's only one direction where they send wealth, and it's out. You're basically trying to say, okay, we're going to set up intermediaries so that the local wealth can invest locally. Comment, and then we're going to go to questions.
Just quick comment in terms of how we thought about it, in particular where the state on the East Side Fund is also creating a community development real estate program for individuals that already own properties along these corridors and have potential ambitions to do more in terms of development. It's been a priority of the mayor that the developers themselves should reflect the community as well, and should be diverse. And there's some intentionality, real intentionality that was required. It was a huge loss for us recently when we lost Rhonda Ricks as a developer in Buffalo, who had really been through the paces on a number of very complex development deals. But that's the ambition with that. And also in terms of the finance aspect, I think that's, it's absolutely right in terms of that language and trying to bring more people in to understand the language of finance, and not even necessarily be a developer at the end of it, but at least to understand the deal potentially, which is why we also intend to do using ULI's model, an urban plan initiative in and around the east side of Buffalo with individuals to teach them just this is how you put together a development deal, and these are the various aspects of the development deal, including getting community support and including planning and zoning and those types of aspects. And it's a one-day commitment, but I think very valuable for certain individuals to understand the finance and then the overall process of how those particular aspects work, so that it is inclusive at the end of the day. And that's one of the hesitations, George, as you're speaking, that is kind of like this flood of money that might build buildings. But to your point that you made earlier and your concerns, what does it actually do for the community? And that's a real question that we challenge ourselves with on a very long time. We can build buildings, but what, at the end of the day, have we actually done for the community in which those buildings are being built?